In this letter, Screwtape continues to address the topic of human sexuality. Wormwood has been attacking the patient's chastity. It seems as if junior tempters are as convinced as many Christians are about the dangers of sex. Although it's useful to the devils, it seems that there are limits. Apparently, this strategy seems to have backfired on Wormwood.
I note with great displeasure that the enemy has, for the time being, put a forcible end to your direct attacks on the patient's chastity. You have ought to have known that he always does in the end, and you ought to have stopped before you reached that stage. For as things are, your man now has discovered the dangerous truth that these attacks don't last forever. Consequently, you cannot use again what is, after all, our best weapon, the belief of ignorant humans that there is no hope of getting rid of us except by yielding. I suppose you've tried persuading him that chastity is unhealthy?
The myth that chastity is unhealthy, is that still around? Anyway, did you notice that God doesn't give the devils free reign over our lives? They are not the boss. He is. This is an important reminder of God's sovereignty. He allows temptations and he limits them. The tempter's attacks don't last forever, so hang in there. Screwtape then explains that they will have to pivot and use the patient's sexuality in a different way.
I haven't yet got a report from you on the young women in the neighborhood. I should like it at once, for if we can't use his sexuality to make him unchaste, we must try to use it for the promotion of a desirable marriage. In the meantime, I would like to give you some hint about the type of woman, I mean the physical type, which he should be encouraged to fall in love with, if falling in love is the best we can manage.
Since Wormwood's patient is a man, Screwtape's focus in this letter is on how to manipulate the man's affection to a particular physical type of woman. When the patient is a woman, the principles are the same. So what is Screwtape talking about regarding physical types?
In a rough and ready way, of course, the question is decided for us by spirits far deeper down in the lower hierarchy than you and I. It is the business of these great masters to produce in every age a general misdirection of what may be called sexual taste. This they do by working through the small circle of popular artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers who determine the fashionable type.
You know how each age has a different idea as to what beauty is? The Greeks had one standard, the Romans a slightly different one. The Tang dynasty in China was different than the Rubenesque women 1,000 years later in Europe. The rate of change in the ideal woman seems to be on the increase, with a new look every few decades. And for men it's the same thing. Demonic forces are behind this. To what end?
The aim is to guide each sex away from those members of the other with whom spiritually helpful, happy, and fertile marriages are most likely.
Screwtape then goes into specifics how the devils have done this in the decades preceding the 1940s. The point of all this manipulation is to twist each gender into something that it is not, so that what is presented is inherently unnatural. What would C.S. Lewis say today? You can see what effect this might have on our marriages. Screwtape continues.
And that is not all. We have engineered a great increase in the license which society allows to the representation of the apparent nude, not the real nude, in art, and its exhibition on the stage or the bathing beach. It is all a fake, of course. The figures in the popular art are falsely drawn. The real women in bathing suits or tights are actually pinched in and propped up to make them appear firmer and more slender and more boyish than nature allows a full-grown woman to be. As a result, we are more and more directing the desires of men to something which does not exist, making the role of the eye and sexuality more and more important, and at the same time making its demands more and more impossible. What follows you can easily forecast.
More than once as I read this book, even this chapter, I exclaim to myself, what would Lewis say about today? This is another one of those times. Far more than in his day, the devils are turning our desires towards something that absolutely does not exist. Screwtape differentiates between real nudes and apparent nudes. Apparent is fake. Women and men in all digital media, from porn to internet models selling toothpaste, are illusions. In our time, when it comes to sex, our eyes are in control. And because of all the exposure to fake bodies, the demands for perfection are more and more impossible than Screwtape could ever have imagined. If you're looking for physical perfection in your spouse on your wedding day, you will certainly be disappointed. Imagine the disappointment you'll experience when you've been married for 25 years. Oh, those devils. So that is generally how the devils are messing up our sexual relationships. Screwtape then turns to how to deal with Wormwood's patient specifically.
That is the general strategy of the moment. But inside that framework, you will still find it possible to encourage your patient's desires in one of two directions. You will find that if you look carefully into any human's heart, that he is haunted by at least two imaginary women, a terrestrial and an infernal Venus, and that his desire differs qualitatively according to its object.
Screwtape describes two types of imaginary women that haunt all men. One he calls the terrestrial Venus.
There is one type for which his desire is such as to be naturally amenable to the enemy, readily mixed with charity, readily obedient to marriage, colored all through with that golden light of reverence and naturalness which we detest.
Although an illusion, it is closer to the woman that heaven likes, and the devils don't.
There is another type which he desires brutally, and desires to desire brutally. A type best used to draw him away from marriage altogether, but which even within marriage he would tend to treat as a slave, an idol, or an accomplice.
Screwtape seems to be saying that the hearts of men have contrary attractions. These are caricatures. They are not real, like Venus.
His love for the first might involve what the enemy calls evil, but only accidentally. The man would wish that she is not someone else's wife, and be sorry that he could not love her lawfully. But in the second type, the felt evil is what he wants. It is that tang in the flavor which he is after. In the face, it is the visible animality, or sulkiness, or craft, or cruelty which he likes. And in the body, something quite different from what he ordinarily calls beauty. Something he may even in a sane hour describe as ugliness, but which, by our art, can be made to play on the raw nerve of his private obsession.
Both these types of women are useful for tempting the man. Most importantly is that these are nothing like real women. The devil's love for us to live in unrealities. The terrestrial woman can involve evil if she's married to someone else, but there's more potential for sin with the infernal Venus or Mars. All this applies to women as well. They too are haunted by the ideal wholesome man and the dangerous bad boy.
The real use of the infernal Venus is no doubt as prostitute or mistress. But if your man is a Christian, and if he has been well trained in nonsense about irresistible and all-excusing love, then he can be induced to marry her, and that is well worth bringing about. You will have failed as regards fornication and solitary vice, but there are other, more indirect methods of using a man's sexuality to his undoing. And by the way, they are not only efficient, but delightful. The unhappiness produced is of a very lasting and exquisite kind.
Marrying the infernal Venus or Mars will probably result in a miserable marriage, which of course delights the minions of hell. The lesson here is clear. Men and women are particular and individual. They are not caricatures or types. So if you do get married, make sure that you are aware that you are marrying a real person, and make sure you know who that real person is. Thank you, and we will see you for Screwtape's 21st letter, where he explores the human weakness of possessiveness and the false sense of ownership over one's life and time. And we'll see you there.